The principles of the Bible are everyday guidelines for life. Today, some encouragement to live out your faith. Think with us today about the experience of Jesus in the business world and how that can help shape our lives. Welcome to Weekend Connection. My name is Mike Dyes. Now, let's get connected. Morals and righteous living are not just for Sundays, but they never were. Somehow, though, we can find ourselves making moral choices on Monday that don't fit in with what we said we believed in church the day before. How should we live in the business world? And what can we learn from the life of Jesus and how he lived in the marketplace? Bruce Hartman is the founder of Gideon Advisors, a Christian advisory firm, and he's joined us today. Dr. Hartman has corporate experience in the fields of sales, finance, and operations. He was known for an ability to bring companies back from the brink of near bankruptcy and on to success. He also has advanced degrees in theology. He's the author of Jesus and Company, a book about connecting the lessons of the gospel with today's business world. First of all, welcome, Bruce Hartman. Welcome to Weekend Connection.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. It's a real pleasure and honor to be on your show.
Well, tell me, what difference would it make if we went into the business world and applied the lessons we learned on Sunday to those real-world situations on Monday?
Well, I think there'd be a significant reduction in headlines of corporate malfeasance, number one. And two, so that's obviously the most important benefit. But the second benefit is I believe that every corporation would be much more sustainable in terms of their ability to operate and provide service to their customers if they followed the lessons of Jesus.
Do you find that some people think that Christian principles are fine, that's one thing, but when it comes to making money, that's something different, and the two really shouldn't get together?
I hear that a lot. I think that people are somewhat dismissive of Christian values when it comes to the workplace, particularly those in the workplace. But Christian values and Jesus' values are very appropriate to the workplace. And the second thing is I do think, and I think not that I think, I know factually that Jesus was very supportive of business and commerce in the first century. So I think that's a bit of a myth that Christian values and business don't mix. When you look at Jesus' 42 parables, now some people will say they're 35, but if you count all of them, there's 42. 35 of them relate to the marketplace. So in other words, don't put new wine into an old wineskin, or the parable of talents, or the parable of the unfaithful servant. Many of Jesus' lessons were directed directly at the first century marketplace and employee. And from our standpoint, it makes sense because more than half the people at any given time in Judea, first century Judea, were working. So if you were going to talk to that audience, that would be a place that it's likely, and scholars agree, likely that Jesus talked a lot with.
We read in the Bible that Jesus was a carpenter. Well, how can his experience as a carpenter be applied to our day today, our business world?
Yeah, well, a couple things. There's two references in the Gospels of Jesus being a carpenter, and when you look at the Greek word which was used in the Gospels, the word is tekton, Tekton. So when you look at the ancient meaning, it says that Jesus wasn't necessarily a carpenter, but he was an artisan. And the reason why there's some debate whether he was a carpenter or not is because there isn't a lot of wood available. But even if we do make that assumption that he was a carpenter growing up in Nazareth, it's likely that he and his father, his earthly father, ran a business that was manufacturing or perhaps repairing or creating products for the community surrounding Nazareth. So from that, he would have known what it was like. The other example that we have in the Bible is where he turns the tables over in the temple. Mm-hmm. And so he was very aware of the abuse that was occurring with people taking advantage of a fairly pious population. The Judean population, particularly the Jewish people, were very, very pious and would show up at these temples three times a year, very faithfully. They'd have to walk sometimes as many as 2 weeks to show up. And when they showed up, they were taken advantage of by money changers and people that would sell them livestock so they could make the sacrifices. So Jesus understood the mechanics of all that was working there. Now, obviously, because he's God, he should, but he's also working, and he was identifiable to the population. So part of how he got the ear of that population was the fact that he worked, and he knew things like what happened in the temple.
All right. So people could see him not just as someone talking about how to live, but actually in the business world himself, in a sense.
Yes, and one of the most important things to be is if you're going to be a great leader, you have to be willing to do the same work that you're asking other people to do. And I think that that's certainly as God, Jesus knew everything, but this was a way for him to be identifiable and relatable to that population.
Our guest is Bruce L. Hartman, businessman and author of Jesus and Company, connecting the lessons of the gospel with today's business world. Well, Bruce, in your book, you say that in today's world, Jesus has become less relatable and that the forces of our contemporary society have hidden Jesus away in a dark closet. What do you mean by that?
Well, a couple of things. Many of the images that we get about Jesus, particularly through media, are usually some guy with long hair holding up a sign saying John 3:16, Jesus saves. And there's no other explanation other than this image. Or we have an image of an evangelist on TV that is preaching the gospel. I'm not saying that they're wrong, but they have a reputation of not necessarily being the most honorable. And you think about some of the scandals that we've had. The second thing is many people in the business world feel that the church thinks that they're soulless creatures. And a lot of the folks that I worked with felt intimidated by the church because of that feeling or that expression, or that they weren't wanted. And recently, I was having a conversation with a local pastor in the area that I live in, and his belief is that all business is sinful. So 50% of America works, and if 50% of America is sinful, that is not a way, number one, that I believe Jesus felt, but two, it's not a great source of evangelism if that's what we want to do. And so telling people that Jesus was pro-business, and I don't mean pro-business in terms of taking advantage of people, but pro-business because many people work in business. That's why he'd be pro-business. Mm-hmm. And two, that Jesus's lessons aren't inconsistent with normal life. 90% of Americans believe in God. Almost 2/3 of Americans pray to God on a regular basis, but only 20% go to church on a regular basis. That's the dichotomy that I'm talking about.
The Bible refers to servants being obedient to their masters and actually doing it not as men pleasers, but unto God. You do see those references in the Bible that directly speak to the working man and working woman, don't you?
Yes, you do. Where I think one of the strongest lessons that we can learn from Jesus is he says, I can only do what I see the Father doing. And I think for business people, it is a lot easier. Life is a lot easier when you have that in the back of your mind. And sure, you may be disobeying your boss at times, and sure, you may be suffering financial losses. But over the longer haul, you'll be known as a person that does the right thing. You'll be well respected. And when it's time to get promoted or find another job, people will know your reputation. So I don't think it's that inconsistent. In the short term, it can be inconsistent, but doing what you see the Father doing is probably the best thing most business people could put in the back of their mind.
In the garden where we see that Jesus had gone to pray, he comes back and his disciples are asleep. It's another example of how, even if we're trying to do the right thing, the spirit may be willing, but often that flesh is weak when it comes to putting it into practice.
But one of the things that Jesus does do in that garden is he gives us all the answer to the question, which is an essential Christian question: what ought we to do? Wrestling with God 3 times, not my will, Father, but yours. So from a Christian and a business ethics standpoint, that's something we should always think about. What ought we to do? Not our will, but God's, number one. Number two, the issue you bring up of the temptation in the flesh. One of the things I challenged a lot of pastors and ministers about is by Monday morning at 8:15, half of America is at work. What are we doing to help our parishioners, particularly those who have to go off to work Monday morning? How are we helping them deal with this? The flesh is weak, but the spirit is willing.
Our guest is Bruce Hartman, businessman and author of Jesus and Company, connecting the lessons of the gospel with today's business world. Well, Bruce, how did this approach to studying Jesus and his relationship to the business world, how did that start for you? What got you thinking along these lines?
That's a great question. To me, it's building a bridge between theology and the business world and finding a connection. I really believe that it existed well before I started my more formal education. I'd worked for 30-odd years in the business world, 17 of those as a CFO. And for many of those years, I was at a Fortune 500 company. And near the end of my career, the reason why I ended my career short was I just didn't feel like I was doing what I was supposed to be doing in life and left the business world. Not because I didn't like it, not because I wasn't satisfied with my career, but I wasn't satisfied where my life was taking me. I wanted to know more about Jesus, to build this bridge. But to do that, I had to know a lot more about theology and Jesus and what the Bible said. And that's why I went and got my master's first and then followed that up with a doctorate degree so that I could really understand what the Bible was saying and really study Jesus. So for about 7 years, that's all I did, was study Jesus. And one of the things I noticed, particularly in my studies, was the commonality between the business world and what Jesus was saying. Now, some of that obviously is influenced because that was my background. But Jesus spoke to the average person. Jesus spoke to the person who was working. The average person who's going to work every day, they need Jesus, but they need it in a way that they understand, not in a condemning way where we say that all business is illegal. And it is true, there is some sinful business. But I found 95% of the people that I worked with, terrific people, God-fearing people, and like you said earlier, the temptation is difficult. So how do we help them? So that was number one. Number two, the book is also designed to show our pastors that not all business people are Bernie Madoff. And if we think about Jesus, and we think about a family of 4, and Jesus as, if Jesus had to do a couple of hours as a salesperson in a car dealership. When that family of 4 came in and told Jesus, we need to buy a car from you, Jesus is not going to sell a family of 4 a Mustang. He's going to sell them something that satisfies the family's needs, whether it's a minivan or an SUV or something that takes care of the family. He's not going to sell something to that family that's going to make him rich. He would sell something to the family that would solve their needs. So if you are a salesman and you want to have great long-term reputations, the best way to do it is to do it the way Jesus would do it.
We've been talking with Bruce Hartman, a businessman and author of Jesus and Company. Well, we've come to the end of the program. In the last minute or so, Bruce, are you optimistic about the business world and about Christians being involved in influencing others in the business world?
I am. I see, well, one, I've received a pretty broad reception, and it's really surprising, Mike, how many people come up to me privately and will have a conversation with me that you would never guess, Mike, have this deep yearning to know Jesus. So that's one thing that gives me encouragement, is that the reception to the book, but also these private conversations I have with folks. And I think the second thing is Jesus always prevails, and I'm always going to be optimistic as it relates to Jesus and his influence on us in our lives in the future, and the impact he's had on our lives in the past.
Dr. Bruce Hartman, author of Jesus and Company, Connecting the Lessons of the Gospel with Today's Business World. How can they get in contact with you?
Well, I have a website, www.brucelhartman.com.
Jesus and Company, Connecting the Lessons of the Gospel with Today's Business World. Bruce L. Hartman, that's Hartman, BruceLHartman.com. Thank you, sir, for sharing with us today here at Weekend Connection.
Thank you for your time, Mike.
My name is Mike Dias. Join us again next week for Weekend Connection.
Thank you for listening to this feature, a production of BBN, the Bible Broadcasting Network. BBN provides 24-hour Christian programming, great Christian music, and Bible teaching. Listen to BBN by clicking the link in the description.